These are all the practice problems that were in the Desmos lesson today. We just didn't have a chance to get through all of them, so I thought I would take the time to go through and do each one of the problems so that you guys have an idea of how to solve these. So remember what we're trying to do. So I'm just going to start with this first one up here. We want to try and isolate the radical first. So if there's anything that's being added or subtracted outside of the radical, we want to get rid of that first. And then we want to make sure that that radical is positive. So if there are any negatives with it, we want to get rid of the negatives by dividing by 1 or multiplying or dividing by -1. And once we have that taken care of, then we can get rid of that radical sign. And so we want to do inverse operations, just like when we solve an equation normally. So because this is the cube root, to do the inverse of the cube root would mean that we have to cube this side. So what happens is that these two cancel each other out and we're left with just what is underneath the radical sign. But whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side of the equation. So if we cube the left side of the equation, we also have to cube the right side of the equation. And 3 cubed, remember, just means 3 times 3 times 3. So 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. And then we just want to solve for the variable. So we want to get rid of this plus 4 here. So the inverse of plus 4 would be minus 4. So t is equal to 23. All right, the next one we did in class, but I think it's worth going over again. We always want to make sure it's just that this part right here has to be equal to this part right here, because those two negatives, really what we're going to do is we're going to divide both of these by -1, so those negatives are going to cancel out. So we get 10 is equal to the cube root of a. And just like in the last one, if we want to do the inverse of the cube root, we're going to cube both sides, because whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. And so the inverses go away, and we get a is equal to 1,000. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 10 is 1,000. So a is equal to 1,000. All right, next one is we are going to look at the cube root of 3 minus w minus 4 is equal to 0. So once again, we always want to make sure that we get the radical isolated. It's kind of like when you solve an equation, you want to get the variable isolated. That's exactly what we're doing here. And because the radical contains our variable, this is the part that we want to isolate first. So we're going to start by adding 4 to both sides. And we're going to, drop this down. So this is the cube root of 3 minus w. And now we can start getting rid of our radical sign. So we're going to cube both sides. So the inverses say bye-bye. We have 3 minus w is equal to 4 cubed is 64. And then we just solve our equation. So subtract 3. These add to 0. Make sure you bring the sign down with the w. So this would be 64 minus 3 is 61. And then we want our variable to be positive, so we're going to either multiply or divide by -1. So w is equal to -61. All right, next one is the cube root of z. Plus 9 is equal to 0. So once again, we want to isolate this part that's being cubed, or cube rooted, and we want to move this to the other side. These add to 0, and we get -9, so we have the cube root of z is equal to negative 9, so we're going to cube both sides. And so we get z is equal to, so on this one, be very careful because when you cube negatives, you can still get a negative answer. It's not like square roots or squares when you multiply or when you square a negative number, you get a positive. So we would have negative 9 times negative 9 times negative 9. So this is a positive 81 times a negative 9, which is a negative 729. Next one, again, this is one that we did in class, but again, I think it's one that's worth going over again, is equal to 2. We don't have anything that's being added or subtracted outside the radical, so we can just jump straight to cubing both sides, because that is the inverse. So we get r cubed minus 19 is equal to 8. So we're going to add 19 to both sides. We get r cubed is equal to 27. And now we have r cubed, so we actually have to undo cubing something, which means we have to take the cube root of both sides. So inverses go away, and the cube root of 27 is 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. All right, next one we have is 5 minus the cube root of k plus 1 equals negative 1. So again, we always are trying to get the radical isolated first. So we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. And we get negative cube root of k plus 1 is equal to negative 6. And I really don't want my radical to be negative, so I'm just going to divide both sides by negative 1. And so we get the cube root of k plus 1 is equal to 6. We're going to cube both sides so that we can do the inverse operation here and just get k plus 1 is equal to 216. Subtract 1 from both sides, and we get k is equal to 215. Okay, next one, cube root of p plus 4 minus 2 is equal to 1. So first things first, we want to make sure that we get this one alone on this side. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. And we get 3 is equal to the cube root of p plus 4. And now we can get rid of this cube root by cubing both sides. We're going to use the inverse operation. So p plus 4 is equal to 27. Isolate p. So we get p is equal to 23. Okay, next one we have is 6 minus the cube root of b is equal to 0. So again, we want to isolate the radical. We want to, anything that's on the same side as this, we want to get rid of that. So we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. So we get negative cube root of b is equal to negative 6. And again, I don't want my radical to be negative, so I'm going to divide by negative 1. So we are left with the cube root of b is equal to 6. And again, we're going to cube both sides, and we get b is equal to 216. Next one is the cube root of 2n plus 3 equals negative 5. Again, first step is we want to get this one alone on this side, so we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. And we're going to get the cube root of 2n is equal to negative 8. And we're going to cube this so that we can get rid of the cube root. They're inverse operations. So 2n is equal to negative 512. And then we're going to divide both sides by 2. So n is equal to negative 256. All right, next one, we've got 4 plus the cube root of negative m plus 4 is equal to 6. First step, we want to get this on a side all by itself. So we're going to subtract 4 here, and we're going to subtract 4 here. And so on this side, we're going to subtract 8, because negative 4 and negative 4 is negative 8. So these add to 0. This is negative 2, and we get the cube root of negative m is equal to negative 2. So we are going to cube our cube root so that we can undo our operation here. We get negative m is equal to negative 8. And I want this to be a positive, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1, and we get m is equal to 8. All right, next one, we have the negative cube root of c is equal to 5. Again, I don't want this to be a negative, so I'm going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. So that gives us the cube root of c is equal to negative 5. We're going to cube both sides, and we get c is equal to negative 125. And the last one. The last one is the cube root of s minus 7 plus 3 is equal to 0. First step, get this alone on this side, so subtract 3. This adds to 0, we get negative 3. The cube root of s minus 7 is equal to negative 3, so now we're going to cube both sides. These are inverse operations, so we have s minus 7 is equal to negative 27. We're going to add 7 to both sides to get the s isolated. We're going to solve for s, so s is equal to negative 20.